to Power and Purpose with me, Leon Man, Maro and Will Troost-Ekong. Really hope you've enjoyed the first episodes of the podcast, and we're looking forward to what we have ahead of us in this episode. So in this pod, we're going to look at support and preparation. What are the things that we do? Who are the people we speak to, and how do we manage the pressure of leading from the front and taking the responsibility of leadership? Mentorship, coaching, self-care, we're going to dive into it all. But first, we have microphones. Those who are just listening, I have to start with this because someone's going to notice and we've got to talk about this. So a big thank you to Everest. You know who you are. You have helped us massively. Guys, we're professional now. Look at this.
Yep, look at it. We are looking pretty sweet with our PMP. So
Step
long may
step.
it continue.
Yeah, this is the journey that we're on, guys. Every episode will be a small improvement, hopefully.
We are leveling up 100%. So get ready for the next level up and get ready for what's coming next, because I'm really interested to listen to you both and learn from you both in terms of your preparation and how you build support around yourselves. You're both elite athletes at the top of your game. I'm doing okay in the stuff that I'm doing and learning, but I really want to know how much you invest in building support around you and what that looks like. So I don't know who wants to go first.
I'll respect my elders and I'll allow Will to go first.
Thank you. I think it's something that has been a real big part of my journey, to be honest. I think when I got to 24, 25, I've made a really conscious effort to make sure that I invest in myself. It was a strategy that I made together also with my agent. We set apart a certain part of his commission, so to speak, to say, okay, this is part that we're going to reinvest in myself to keep improving. It was something that I was doing already, but I wanted him to also buy into, because I thought this was something that we can really exploit and see if I can hit my ceiling, right, or get near enough it. So the first thing for me was to get a mental coach, someone that I'd been working with again from the age of 23. I was introduced to the concept the first time when I was 16, when I was at Tottenham Hotspur. It was part of the education that we got at the time. But it was something that I didn't really embrace, whereas I felt the first time I really took that serious, maybe it was because it was the first time I had to kind of put my money behind it, and also really felt like I needed someone to prepare me for those big moments. So I worked together with a coach called Joost Leenders. He was renowned in Holland. I found him on the internet. I knew he worked with Memphis Depay and some other players who had maybe some more troubled backgrounds, or were seen as players that were really talented. However, they had different things that were holding them back. And our first conversation was in a hotel in Turkey. I just signed for a team called Bursaspor, and I felt quite a lot of pressure being there. It was the first time I played in massive home crowds. It was a year before the World Cup, and I kind of wanted to make sure that I could seize this opportunity to have a good season, to be ready for the World Cup. So that was the first investment I ever made, and I think it really helped me, because it was something that we took game by game, and I kind of wanted to approach it throughout the good times, but also the moments that I knew would be struggling. And then the second investment I made for my support system, or the kind of ecosystem I wanted to build around myself, was a personal video analyst. So it was a guy called Loran. The company's called Tactilize, and I thought they were really great. I think for me, I learned so much during that period, because it was trying to understand what other players did and becoming conscious and aware of what I was doing during a game. And I think once you can kind of raise that awareness about how you make decisions, that's how you can actually process and make better decisions, because until that moment, I felt like I played all my games on intuition. And whereas when I started to realize, okay, there's a certain patterns when I do things right, or when I give myself the best possibility to do things right, you have to kind of break those down. So that was really great, and I felt like I learned a lot. And it was also really good to look at other players and understand how they work, because once you be able to pick out those patterns, you can see that come back in other players where it might be natural for them. However, they do the same things to make the right decisions. So that was important for me. So I had both a part on the pitch that was away from everything else, from the results, the club, the manager, the expectations maybe that you have there, and also the mental part of dealing with setbacks and also moments when everything is going well, to make sure that you can kind of ground yourself and carry on. So those are two people that I built into my team, but later those kind of have been replaced by confident people that I feel comfortable with, that I can carry those conversations with. But yeah, that's been my journey so far.
And Will, who helped you make those decisions? Because as a 23-year-old deciding to part with money and to think about it in that level of detail, understanding yourself is really, really quite impressive.
Well, it was my own decision, but I think it was, it wasn't someone who really kind of pushed me towards that moment or that decision. I think it was more that I wanted to prepare for what's next, and I knew the best way I can do that. I've always been someone who's been very much focused on foresight and trying to prevent issues and problems, and whenever I'm in a position where I feel comfortable or maybe at the next level that makes me feel uncomfortable, I always feel like I need to be working for something all the time. So that was always the way that I kind of wanted to explore what I could do next, whether it was with video analysis or mental coaching or nutrition or personal training. There's always things that I've tried to keep adding on and keeping myself busy and the whole journey of self-improvement, because I felt that was so important and key to bring me where I was at that age of 23. But also I knew those would be the key things that were going to carry me on, help me improve from that moment onwards,
And one question before coming to Mauro, what was the response of your employers, of the clubs? Because I've seen with other players, they bring in their own people for conditioning, whatever it might be, and then there's conflict with the club because the advice can be different.
Yeah, the only one that I actually had some conflict with was with my personal trainer. So it was a guy called Lucas Krull. I still work with him now, based in Germany. I had seen some of his stuff online. I knew that he had a documentary with Douglas Costa, and I was really blown away by watching that. I think it was many years before I actually contacted him. And we worked a lot on injury prevention stuff. So it was quite a meticulous and hard program. And the first time that I invited him to come to Turkey at the time where I was playing, there was some raised eyebrows about having him around the training ground and then in the gym after our training sessions, because of course the club, they map out your physical development and your load. So that was the first kind of clash that I met. Whereas with the mental coach and with the video analysis team that I had, it wasn't something that they knew about, so it was no real resistance. However, with the physical extra work that I was doing, there was. But I really tried to make it clear to say, guys, we were working in together with the club. It's something to be that is complementing the work that we're doing. But you know how it can be. As soon as maybe results turn around or the performance is not how they want it to be, it'll be the first thing that they point out, which was quite difficult. And then I actually carried on working in that way without maybe informing them as much as I should have done, just for ease and knowing that I had some peace of mind around that subject.
When you get people to work for you and assist you and help you along this journey, as a top class footballer, there's a lot of people who would want to be associated with you. There's a lot of people who would want to work with you. So how do you decipher, or how did you decipher the ones who were quality and the ones who were not? And the follow-up to that is, when they weren't at the level, how did you part ways?
So all three of those parts, the mental coaching, the video analysis, and the personal coaching, are things that I still carry on up to today. So there haven't been any moments where I felt like I needed to part ways or I didn't necessarily get any more benefit from it. I chose all of those models from people that I looked up to. So where there was proven track record with players that I might have known, not personally, but I knew about, stuff that I could find online. And that was kind of the bar that I was aiming at and saying, okay, these are the kind of people that I want to work with. That might have been out of my roam, so to speak, in from people that I might know around me that could introduce me to them. So that's the kind of way I wanted to level up, by trying to see, okay, what are the people doing that are ahead of me, and seeing if I could then reach out to them and see, okay, what are you guys working on? How are you working that way? And can that be beneficial to me, and can it be tailored to me? So that's how I did it. So it was personal research at the time. But yeah, it gives you a lot of confidence to make those decisions, to reach out to someone, or maybe part way with money and invest in that time with someone. But I know, okay, they are working with these athletes, and that's the journey that they've been on. And I think they were, all three of them were very clear, showing, okay, this is where we started at, and this is where we are at now, and this is what we have added to their journey. And then you can kind of see what kind of impact it had for them, and yeah, then decide whether or not you want to go into that journey with them as well.
Because I think you must be a very good employer, or you must have a very good eye for these sorts of things, because most people, and this is whether it's in sport or in business, and I'd love to get your opinion on this, Leon, through your business experience, but you often get people to support you. And in one way, shape, or form, whether that's a job, whether that's, an assistant, or so on and so forth, and they don't quite hit the mark, or they're not quite at the level that you need them to be. So then you're faced at a crossroads. You either, if their character is right and they just need some helping, you try and coach them up to the level, or they're just a completely wrong fit, and then you just go your separate ways. So when you've had those experiences, Leon, how have you managed to deal with it?
When I think about the experiences that I've had where I've had support around me and it's not been working out, for me, it's just about charting out, well, what's not working and why, and finding a real clear kind of way, removing emotion to be able to kind of deconstruct, well, these are the reasons why this isn't working for me anymore, and I need to move forward. And the difficulty with that sometimes, and I did a mapping exercise with a company called McKinsey, a really kind of like brilliant session it was, where you map out some of the support that you have, and you put kind of a matrix together where it says, do you get on with this person? Is this person a really good person? Do you like having them around? And then you score them there. And then you put the skill set and their effectiveness. And it doesn't always marry up in the way that you think it might do, because you kind of sometimes can keep people around who you actually really like and enjoy their company. However, when you look at what they're actually delivering, it's not where you think it might be based on how you feel emotionally about them. So you have to kind of deconstruct it and make sure that it's kind of, this service is making sense. And that can be the difficult part, right? Because if you don't like or get on with someone, and they're not delivering a great service, then actually stepping away from that isn't so hard. But if you do really like someone and do feel a connection with someone, but what they're actually providing for you is wide of the mark, that can be a difficult situation. I've found. However, you have to think about, well, what is this relationship about? Because if this is my friend, then let's go for a coffee and have a chat. But if this is about a service to me to help me perform better, then actually this is a different relationship, and we can't get the two things mixed up. So for me, when I have had situations like that, and I haven't had that many situations, reflecting on it now, I just feel it's just about breaking down, look, these are the things that aren't working for this reason, so I'm going to try something different. And I think trying something different, refreshing the support that you have around you, is actually a good thing, because you can both get into rhythms that actually become something that doesn't actually help you move forward, and you change, they change during that time as well. So it's part of what I would say is a journey that you should always be evaluating. I don't know, Maro, if that kind of resonates with you, or if you're asking that question because you've had some tricky situations in the past that you've had to manage.
All of the above, really. I've had situations where I actually really like said individual, and I've had to part ways with them just because, whilst they weren't doing a bad job, I was aspiring for a great job. And it involves having, difficult, frank and sometimes uncomfortable conversations. But as you said, whenever I've been in those moments, I just think, like, what is the goal? What are we aspiring to do? What are we aspiring to achieve? And ultimately, staying in those sorts of relationships, it's me in this case who suffers in the long run. So if I stay and if I overstay, or if I allow a relationship to continue for longer than it needs to be, is ultimately me who's suffering. So, and I don't want to suffer. Not unnecessarily suffer, at least. So it just involves being, I guess, courageous enough to change course, whilst obviously you want to do it with compassion and understanding, and do it sensibly. But I think you have to make those bold decisions at times.
I think that so much comes down to also understanding that the reason that you often would have worked with these people is because you're trying to leave your comfort zone, right? And you're trying to reach a better goal. So I think there's two ways of it. Often from that working together could be a friendship, which is difficult to cut off at that moment in time. But I also felt, for example, with the video analysis team that I work with, and also the mental coaching, at a certain point there becomes a mastery of that new skill where I don't necessarily need that support in the same way, because in theory, if whatever I've been taught is something that I can now run with, I should be able to do that by myself. So then the roles kind of change, and I found that also, same like Maro, quite difficult to have those conversations with those people because they're part of a journey which is quite personal. And it might be the same in the workplace when you like someone, to then say, okay, well, this is as much as we've been able to grow together, but from this moment on, I might only need you sporadically or for something new that I don't necessarily know about, instead of a constant support. But I think once you have that honest conversation with someone, they should receive that as a compliment, because that means that now you've reached a greater level from where you met them before. But of course, when there's monetary value involved, it can also be a little bit difficult, because once you build up a relationship and maybe a working relationship with someone, there might be a certain expectation to carry on working that way. And like anything, if you're working on yourself or on your business, it never feels like the job is ever done. So they could always find new arguments to say, okay, we should continue in that way because this is still what we can achieve. But I think deep down, and like Maro alluded to, you know yourself what is the right moment, because otherwise it's actually at cost of yourself, instead of actually being able to continue that development journey and improvement.
This is fascinating because I feel like I've definitely stayed too long. I feel like I'm talking about like an ex-girlfriend or something here, but right, it's a situation where it's a difficult conversation to have. So therefore, you're waiting for the right time to have it, but meanwhile, having a service that actually doesn't really make much sense or is not working out as you want to. I'm trying to think how we can pass on some. Well, I mean, we've passed on some helpful advice to the audience and the community already, but it's certainly something in self-reflection that I think about a lot, because I don't think I'm great at it, and I need to get better at basically measuring impact, sharing that, and giving honest feedback, but also receiving it, because like some of the times it hasn't necessarily been their fault. It's not you, it's me. It's that kind of conversation where some self-reflection is needed. But ultimately, it's about the direction of travel, and you know, it can be something off their mind by actually saying this ain't working right now, so we need to go in different directions. But it's something I know I need to get better at 100%, and make interventions earlier, so that maybe it continues longer, but I'm getting what I'm asking for or what I need, which are two different things. But I need to be able to listen to be able to receive that.
Yeah, and I think where sometimes people feel shocked is when they feel it comes out the blue. So, whether it's your marriage, or your coaching relationship, or relationship between friends, or business relationships, these relationships are better when you communicate clearly and effectively. So if out of nowhere you go to the office and you have no idea that you're doing a poor job, then one second you get pulled into the boss's office and be like, look, sorry, I don't no longer need your services, then that might come across a bit weird. But if you're okay, look, we need to do this, then that is falling short. Okay, that's not working, let's try this. Or you're continuously not making the bar, then it probably doesn't come as a shock, and you probably accept yourself that, look, I probably guess this was gonna happen. So I think the more we can communicate with people that we work with, whether it's a professional or social capacity, but in this instance professional, I think it will lead to better outcomes without a doubt.
Big time. And Maro, I know there'll be a curiosity from the community right now who's just listened to Will break down some of the support he has around him. Like, what's the comparison with football and rugby?
I'll say it's relatively similar. From my understanding, I think rugby, we have a lot more dependent on team facilities and team capabilities as opposed to football. So we have a very strong analysis team where they do a whole lot of work for us. But if I was even to go back a step, I kind of split it between on-field support, off-field support.
Mm-hmm.
Within the on-field support, in my experience, some of the best people that I've lent on has been my teammates, and observing them, watching them, then asking them, how do they do this? How do they do that? That involves you being inquisitive and wanting to find out things. But by far the biggest teacher for me throughout my career has been the guys I've played with and the guys I've shared the field with and the guys that I've admired and who've walked the path ahead of me. They've passed on so much knowledge and they've definitely upskilled me significantly. On top of that, obviously the coaches play a huge role, which can't be understated. But similar to Will, psych support. We have a psych guy at the club, and we have a psych person at England who I've been working with for a few years now, and that's always been of interest to me. And I'm sure Will attest to this. The higher and higher you go in terms of performance and sport, the more and more important the mental side of the game becomes. Like, if you think about it, each time you take a step up, everyone's a little bit quicker, everyone's a little bit fitter, then the marginal gains that you can make is up here, is with regards to your mind. So that becomes a huge side of the game, and a game that can be a real point of difference if you allow it to. Then off the field, and this is something that has increased as I've gotten older. Even though I'm the youngest person here, in rugby terms, I'm getting on the
Senior pro.
Prime years.
Prime years. I feel like I'm in my prime. But as I've been getting older, I've paid more and more and more attention to recovery. So recovering, making sure that I'm ready to go. So whether that is soft tissue, whether that is sauna, ice baths, gyms, providing these facilities as close to my home or in my home as much as possible. That's been a huge help for me in terms of getting right for games and recovering as quick as possible on top of that, and always just like looking at new ways that you can perhaps recover or perform better. I'm always very much open to that.
If I could just add a point there, Maro, I think that is such a big part of the journey though, because you try to find different ways to win margins, right? Because sometimes, like Maro said, the higher you go, the smaller those margins are. So you try everything from sleep coaching to a private chef to video analysis to having a personal physiotherapist, working in a gym extra. And I think you just have to see bits where you can gain that edge. And I think there's also something about that mentality of always wanting to find that edge. So ideal scenario, you want to be able to find that at your club. And I think there's so much said for role models or players that you might work with day in, day out, and just picking their brain and trying to use that information to benefit yourself. However, I always found that the football world, you as you grow older, you kind of see it more as a business, and you understand that you yourself are a limited company within this ecosystem that is now lending its services to a football club in the time being. So for me, it kind of gave me a peace of mind knowing that these people are going to be on this journey from start to finish, because I've also had some bad experiences where the club might have helped me to get some mental coaching. I remember one moment particularly when I was at Udinese, when I just signed a new contract, everything was going well, but I kind of had a burnout and I felt like I was probably depressed and I needed to see someone. But then I had moments and situations where I almost felt that the club used that against me, and I hated that feeling. And I always wanted to feel like, okay, certain things are just part of my own journey. I don't necessarily need to tell anyone about it because I'm doing this for me. And I know that whether I'm lending my service to this club or that club, I'm improving myself, which is going to keep myself relevant and also on top of my game and ability. So I feel like that was such a key thing. But ideally, you want to be able to get that from your environment. But if it doesn't provide that, you want to go out and continuously look for that. And I think that's the best way that you can also give yourself longevity. If you say, okay, I'm willing to actually invest in myself through recovery, anything else that you can think of where you can still get those marginal gains.
Well, I think that's a great way of putting it in terms of describing yourself as a limited company. That's something that I talk about with the athletes that I work with through my consultancy, in terms of, well, what are you trying to achieve and build? Because you're going to have to invest in certain things to be able to get to that place, whether that's building a brand that you take beyond your career as a professional athlete into your next phase of your career, whether that's, the support you need or you physically, that you feel will get you to the next level. We're talking about the mental side of things. It won't just happen, as kind of part of the messaging. And, some will hear it and will invest, and others will think, well, actually, I don't want to make that investment. I will wait. And everyone's different, and you have to respect everyone's on their own journey. But I think describing it as being a limited company just kind of like focuses the mind on the things that a company would do to make sure a company performs as well as possible.
To your point, Leon, I think it's the other part of performance and preparation for performance off the field, particularly for an athlete, but it still applies to business people as well, is the team that you can put around yourself to allow you to focus on the performance. So from an athlete point of view, you will typically have a lawyer, you'll typically have an agent, sometimes you have a commercial agent and an on-field agent, sometimes they're the same person. So creating a structure around you which works for you, and this is, there's not a one size fits all, but creating whatever structure you have around you off the field which helps you to perform at your best on the pitch is also incredibly important.
And if I can add to that, the journey changes. I think from a young age, there's certain things. So if I talk about football players, when you're young, the most important thing would be defining your craft, right, and improving on your technical skills. When you still have the time and the ability to make certain things really your own, then you have the journey, for me personally, which was taking the next step up and being able to perform under pressure. Then you get to a point where you might challenge yourself in a different league, so you need to have a new physical output. You might need to see, okay, can I find ways to get my performance as a whole better? And now I find myself in a space where I'm also thinking about post career. So, to be honest, the reason that Leon and myself met each other for the first time was because I was willing to invest into someone who was going to help me with my PR and my whole plan for post career and what kind of messaging I wanted to give now, and have a platform like the Power and Purpose podcast, but other things that I'm also working off pitch, sorry. So that is something that I wouldn't have even thought about 10 years ago, 5 years ago, maybe 3 years ago, but now are so relevant. And I think the key message of this is trying to continue self-development and understanding that there's always something that you can improve on. And I think you just have to be realistic and maybe understand what is most relevant at this moment to maximize your output of improving as a person, regardless of the industry or career that you're in right now, but also your own goals and visions ahead and how you're going to get there. So again, if I bring it back to myself, if I say, okay, I'm 32 now, I'll be 33 next summer. If I want to be a coach post-career, then this will be a great time for the next 2 or 3 years to also think about what kind of coach do I want to be? How am I going to get my coaching badges? How I'm going to develop my relationships and understanding, and maybe start really paying attention to what people have been doing around me that I enjoy, that I can then use to hit the ground running and prepare for that next career. So it's very much the phase of your life that you're in and maybe part of your career that you're in. But I think it's always something that you have to think about. And I always feel really uncomfortable when I'm just being and not thinking about what is coming next and how can I work towards that goal, because that's always been such a big part of my life. And I think as a testimony of where I am now has always been of things that I wanted to work on and improve to, which now people say that is natural, which wasn't at all. And it was something that I had to learn and to get experience on, and also, skills that I need to continuously polish up to make sure that they are a standard which people now might know you for.
How common is this way of thinking, guys? Because, clearly, you're both very impressive people. You happen to be very good at sport. You happen to be great leaders as well. Within your groups of athletes, of players, is this a common thing? Has it become more common that athletes are thinking about themselves as limited companies? Are they thinking more about what they do away from the field? Are they thinking about how they support their performance? Things we're talking about now. Are these conversations you're having with teammates when you're, traveling away to wherever the game is and you've got some time together?
I think it's very mixed. I think there are some players who are fantastic, incredibly proactive, whether it's their performance on the field or preparation for life post the sport that they play. Very diligent. They put plans in place, they follow it, and have a relatively smooth transition. Whereas there's some people who are absolutely dreadful and almost just sleepwalk into retirement and think, oh my goodness, what am I going to do now? Then think, oh, maybe I should be a coach. Oh, maybe I should do this. Maybe I should do that, without giving it real thought. And that would be my biggest fear. That would be a nightmare for me, to be honest. I would go crazy I might end up in a bad place if that ever happens to me, because I just hate the idea of not giving myself autonomy over what I do next and having it just happen by chance. If you reflect on people who've achieved consistent success over a period of time, it's never by chance. It's never by chance. It always comes down to how they prepare, the manner of how they prepare, and the mindset that they have regarding their preparation. It's never, oh, let's just see what happens. And in life, it's not bad to have a bit of spontaneity, and not you don't have to be too tight about everything. But something as important as this is incredibly important, especially if I was to contrast rugby to football here. Rugby players earn a good living, however, it's not on the same level as footballers. So a lot of rugby players have to work post rugby to to maintain their lifestyle or maintain their living standards, whereas footballers, depending on how they manage themselves, can probably get by living off their investments. But that being said, I'm sure there's a lot of footballers too who live in the fast lane and spend an awful lot of money.
I was
As
just
we've,
gonna say,
yeah,
I don't know if I
as
know a lot of players that can just sit back and live off their investment. Of all the players that I know that are now post career, I think that sometimes is like the illusion that everyone thinks of, but I don't know if that's really in the reality for most.
But Will, I think that is as a result of spending way too much money during their playing career, because most top level footballers, if they were managing their finances in a mediocre to normal fashion, they should be able to do that. But I assume it's because they spend so much whilst they're playing, then they're used to a certain level of spending which they can't maintain. What's it been from your experience?
Yeah, I mean that was kind of the point I was going to make because again, it comes down to perception. What is mediocre and what is normal, right? So I think if you don't have that maybe financial education or understanding of what you want to do, but I think this is a whole nother debate, right? So I can get into that. But just kind of coming back to your first point, Maro, I think for players, how that looks in general is that how I see is that there's two categories of players, right? You have naturally gifted, and then you have players that have to maybe work for the position that they're in. So I think you kind of
Which one are you?
I'm definitely the working class player. So I think when you are coming from that background, you become very conscious of what you are doing consistently, and maybe also, you have to think ahead of how you want to keep up or achieve like the players that are more naturally gifted. So then the naturally gifted group, what you often see is that they then kind of comes down to choice, because they often build a good team around them, which might be by the agent that you choose or your parents deciding who mixes with you or whoever you kind of see fit in your circle. Or you might end up, not having that autonomy that you spoke about and giving that to an agent who might not necessarily work on those points that you want to improve on, or you need to improve on, or you can even see that you need to improve on. And that's where you see players slip up so badly. And I think within players, the only thing that is like a common subject is like personal training and measurements that you can see directly of how fit someone looks or how quickly they can move on a pitch. But there's not often conversations about are you having mental coaching, are you seeing a nutritionist, or even more important, what you just touched on now, what kind of financial advisor do you have? Those are all things that sometimes are not really talking subjects, which is a shame, because that means that you'll have to have your own journey and fall down and make mistakes to get to those answers. Whereas, if you were to share within that, you could probably get a lot of shortcuts to understand, okay, my teammate tried this and it doesn't work out, or this has been great for that person. But yeah, that kind of comes down to that consciousness and also maybe the willingness of wanting to find out those details. Because if you've always been a player that just has it all and it's just come naturally, you're probably not even going to think twice about, okay, what's Maro or Leon doing, and how can I pick from that? So it kind of is sometimes a bit like catch-22 and difficult to say, okay, one or the other. But yeah, I think within football you see a real spread of players and mindsets, and often the ones that I have seen that had the most longevity are the ones that are most conscious about what they're doing and what they want to achieve, rather than just being and maybe relying on always being that person that they thought is the best person, or people have told them that you are the best person for this job.
It's a big decision, isn't it, for a young person? Because ultimately that's what we're talking about. You can have an agent, you can make a decision on an agent at 16, have them from 17.
And that's the bit of chance. That is the bit of chance.
And that is, I mean, that's wild. If I think about the decisions I was making at 16, 17 years old, wow, I mean, look, 25, 26 years old at times, I was not in a place to make big decisions. And these are huge decisions in terms of I'm going to have this agent or this manager have this much power and control. A lot of the time, parents aren't necessarily in the loop with how it works in sport. And there's some brilliant people like Miles Lewis Skelly's mum, Marcia, who's doing some great work with parents out there to help them in terms of understanding the landscape. But to think about making such big decisions at such a young age for such pivotal people in your career and life when it's a short career is absolutely wild. I kind of want to take the community closer into this space now, because I would love to know, like, as leaders in those dressing rooms, do you feel any sense of responsibility at times? And it's difficult because you've got your own agents, there's conflicts, etc., with different agents, etc. But to pull some of the lads in, and in women's sports, some of the women in who are listening, to kind of like say, right, these are things I have done well. You should consider doing them, not necessarily with the people directly I'm working with, because that might be a conflict, but you should consider these things. Do those conversations happen?
One of the things that I tell people with this space is, by far, in my view, the most important thing you can do as an athlete, as a young person of promise rising up the ranks, is to get an independent quality lawyer. The quality lawyer who is independently working for you, not working for your agent, not working for the club, not working for any brand, but working for you, is by far the best decision that I've made from a business point of view in my career. Because to have someone who genuinely has your interest at heart, who is not conflicted about who he works for, who he represents, but is in your corner, I think is incredibly important. And that's the advice I would have, because agents, I've worked with a number of good agents, but they do have an agenda. They want to do what's best for them, whilst I'm sure a lot of them will say, I want to do what's best for my client. But ultimately, when it comes down to it, they want to do what's best for them. And when you have that independent legal advice, which has your best interests at heart, I think that's the number one piece of advice I'll give to anyone, really.
I think I can only agree with Maro. I think one of the biggest journeys that I've been on, and one of the people that is still my advisor across sport, but even generally in life, has also been the lawyer that I found, who kind of gave me counsel when we're talking about contract negotiations and agents and trying to structure certain things. But yeah, I think that's also a relationship you have to build up with someone, and it doesn't necessarily have to be someone that is a paid service, so to speak. So I've also been very lucky that my father-in-law was so honest with me. So I remember certain conversations when I used to come back to my parents-in-law's house with a new watch or a new car, and for me that was like something that I could be impressed with, or maybe in the changing room meant something. He would kind of laugh at me and just tell me the truth and say, is that really something important in your life right now? So I think you can be very lucky that you have great people around you. And if I take it back to your question about the changing room and my role within that, is that my words means everything. So I would never tell someone this is how you have to do it because I did it that way. But I think there's something to be said about transparency. So whether it's about finance, investment, what I would say to a coach, to an agent, how I would structure deals, speak to a physiotherapist, to a doctor, what I would do. I really enjoy sharing that with other players who are early in their journey, that can relate to that. But what you then also quickly see is that people want to take advantage from that position. So I get called all the time by agents to say, okay, do you know this player? Often it's about a Nigerian player that I am now seen as their captain in the national team. Please, can you speak to them and tell them that I am this person for the job, or I can move them here? And if that deal goes through, then I'm going to give you X. That is literally the conversation that I have quite often with someone before I even get a chance to say yes or no, or I'm not going to do that. That is how they will frame it towards me. So I think once you are in that position, for me, my credibility is everything. So I would never want to lose that towards someone. And I think, yeah, that is something that you try to do, because I think people that have done so much for me have also just given me an honest opinion. So that's the kind of influence that I try to have, and you kind of leave your door open to anyone to ask for that help. But yeah, I don't think it's the right thing to maybe, really implement on yourself on someone else to say this is how you should do it. But I also feel there's an obligation as a good friend or teammate or someone that cares about someone else. If you're not doing the right thing, I'll be the first one to say, well, actually, listen, I think you should do something different, or maybe you should speak to this person, that person, because otherwise I don't feel like I can be honest with myself and kind of have that same relationship with someone, because I think that's how people value me, to give them that feedback. And I am not perfect, far from it, but I also have my sounding board and people around me and people that are close to me that I would ask their feedback for. And if they were to criticize me or say, Will, you're not doing the right thing, I would have to take that on board and think about it.
We're getting some real insight here, so thank you guys for sharing like this, because I think, sometimes I forget that I'm like pretty central within the sports and media industries, and just get used to the stories and get used to the behaviors and the practices. But actually, for people listening to this now, many will be unfamiliar with what can be the wild west of the agents world, where I could talk for a long time about some of the things that I've seen, the approaches to 14-year-olds that I've heard about to get them signed up, or their parents signed up on consultancy agreements. There's all sorts of things that I've heard about that are just such bad practice, and people taking advantage a lot of the time of people who just don't have information. One of the things that we've touched on, which I find fascinating, is just like the structure of an athlete setup. Because very much what I see in England and Europe, certainly in football, is an agent running everything. And as Maro talked about, everyone has like a different motivation. So like an agent's motivation, an agent gets paid a particular kind of way often, so that's how they will do their business. And you get incredible agents who are fantastic, and then you get some agents who are in it for a quick buck and want to grab as much as they can and then run for the door, right? Like any industry, you get good practice and bad practice, but in sport, like a lot of unqualified people can run through the door, grab something and run out, and FIFA's regulations in football are helping with that. But I guess the point I want to make is, like, Tamaro's point about having a really good lawyer in your corner who doesn't have those conflicts is really interesting. And I spent a little bit of time many years ago with a guy called Maverick Carter, who works with LeBron James. And my word, sitting down with him, he is just a strategist. And I haven't met many agents that are real strategists. I've seen incredible business people, but I haven't met many who are like really into the strategy of how do we build a brand and how do we build this business, this limited business, which is this athlete, into someone who performs well on the pitch, but also off it is doing everything as effectively as possible and coordinates bringing in the different expertise needed in terms of investments, in terms of brand building, PR, all those different things. And yeah, it's fascinating to me as sport gets bigger commercially, whether that becomes a thing here, whether that becomes a model that's actually adopted more widely, and agencies offer that, as opposed to what's being offered, or what I see being offered at the moment, with lots of talk of 360 service, whatever that means, which I think can be letting people down.
Yeah, I think that the only thing that I would want to chip in with that is that I think as a player or as a parent who might be listening to this, or any kind of negotiation that might not be sport related, I think that there has to be a certain demand. I remember my first rep agreement with an agent was a bog standard. Must have been from the FA website that had nothing edited at all. And the reason that I wanted to sign with that agent at that time as a 14 or 15-year-old was because he promised me that I'd get X amount of boots a year, which was the most important thing to me. But I think now my relationship with my agent's completely changed, where I also say this as an advice to other players that speak with me and say, what do you do? Is that you can demand to have that 360 service. So for me, if an agent believes in me that I am the right person that we can do X amount of business with, then for me, you also have to put your money where your mouth is, right? So if I want to invest in a mental coach or video analysis or PR strategist, for me, that has to come out of the budget, which is for the agent, because that is something that you're investing in, that you're going to see your return in again at a later point if we all do well together. So but I think that kind of comes with experience and confidence. And I didn't know anyone in the football world when I first started. So you can be naive, and maybe also your parents who you look up to, or other people who might be mentors for you that don't necessarily know how a certain business work. I don't know if probably it's the same in rugby, but it's quite difficult to protect that talent and to also understand that you have something which adds values to someone else. And like you say, they see that as a way of business and making money for them. So I think that can be quite transactional, which is fine, because you have to understand someone else who might come in as an agent who you don't know as a person aren't necessarily going to care for you. However, I think you have to make sure the transaction is as fair as possible, and that you as a player get the most out of that situation that is going to help you develop and improve if that's the stage of your career that you're in.
Yeah, just to add on that, I would say the two bits of advice I would have for young players, regardless of the sport, is, as I said before, get that independent lawyer who can advise you. Then also make sure all the money flows through your account and then you pay everyone else, because I've seen and experienced instances before where you're getting paid a bulk of money from a sponsorship, then the accountant or the agent will then pay it or forward it onto you. Then over time, there's a whole load of deductions that are taking place that you're completely unaware of. So if all the money is paid through your account, you can clearly keep track of what's coming in, what's going out. If there's deductions being made, you're the one who's making those deductions. I think the transparency around that is really important.
Can I ask one question about that, Maro? So would you say then a lawyer that you're talking about has to be specifically a sports lawyer? Does it have to be a lawyer, or can it be an independent advisor that you might be able to call on? Because if I don't have any money to invest in such a sports lawyer, how can I still get that advice from someone, hopefully, that can help me make the right decisions?
So, two parts to that. The first part is, I think, if you really don't have the money, it's a bit of a challenge. However, if you do have the money, and perhaps it's a bit of a sacrifice to pay for said advice, I would recommend still carrying through and paying for that advice, because lawyers can save you a lot of money in the long run. So I remember when I first started looking at lawyers' fees and their bills, I'm like, wow, this is significant.
Which is the
How-
first feeling, right? Because
Yeah,
it might feel like it's a lot more expensive all of a sudden doing it together with this lawyer.
yeah. However, the lawyer can save you a whole lot more money in the long run, because especially with when you sign a bad contract, that could be a year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, depending on what it is, whether it's a on-field deal or whether it's a commercial deal. It could be a long time. If you have a good lawyer look at that, it'll probably cost you a few £1,000, or maybe a bit less if it's if depending on what the agreement is. But it will definitely be worth it in the long run. If you don't have the money, if you really don't have the money, I would recommend you from a football point of view, I don't really know how it works in football, but in rugby, we have a trade union. And with our trade union, we have some legal advice and people that we can lean on in there, which what is that they will be able to provide a service which you can pretty much guarantee it's independent and they're looking out for your interests. So there's ways you can perhaps go about it, and there's arrangements that you can come to.
So if that wasn't in the sports industry, right? So anyone who's listening right now, would we agree on saying that it's very important to try and see if you can find a mentor, a sounding board, or someone that you can kind of see outside of the complete situation to give you an honest feedback, advice that would have no interest, whether it be in left or right?
I would agree with that, but I also, without being disrespectful to certain industries, if I'm having a legal issue and the only advice I can get is from a carpenter, it might be a wise carpenter, but it's a completely different world. So I would always encourage them to try and get someone in the world in which we're talking about. If it's life advice, then that's completely different. But if it's about contracts or
Something
whatever,
specific. Okay.
it's you need to look to someone who knows a bit about that world. It may not have to be a direct. You have to be directly in it, but I think you should know a little bit about it. Then the other thing I would also recommend is a lot of law practices do pro bono work. A lot of law practices would, if if you reach out and are proactive and make your case, I think you'll be surprised with some of the responses that you get.
And can we also agree, sorry, because I found it really interesting what you said about the financial part and agents, right? That shouldn't just be limited and restricted to this example of the finance, that as a player in our industry, whether it be rugby, football, tennis, any sport, there needs to be a certain level of, inquisitive, what's the right words, to be inquisitive, right, to whatever is going on, to find out that that is really happening and that you're happy with that. And I can also understand from a player perspective, maybe you don't want to know what's going on because that could be like a lot of information, but at least that there's someone else in your corner, whether that be a parent or a big brother or someone that you trust, your coach before, to make sure that they are asking those questions constantly, so that there's no situation where money is getting paid into certain accounts before it gets to you, or decisions are getting made about your future that you might not necessarily agree with once they come to fruition. And like that constant kind of wanting to know more about what's going on, because it's, in the end, it's your future. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think it's important to have people who you have faith in, who can do the things that you're talking about. However, I think it's important to have faith, but not blind faith. Blind faith is very bad. You shouldn't have blind faith in anything. So let's just use an example. Let's say I have faith that my lawyer is going to do a good job and check the contracts and make necessary comments. That doesn't mean I never look at said agreements, or I never check the comments, or I never see what has been put in there. I don't just delegate all authority onto him in that regard. I too also, obviously I'm not a lawyer, so perhaps I won't know the details of everything, but I too will look at agreements and be like, okay, that makes sense, that makes sense. Oh, I don't quite understand this. What is this? Like, what does this mean? Okay, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? But it's unrealistic to expect a young 21 Premier League footballer to have all that insight and all that knowledge. However, in whatever way they can, they need to have good faith, but not blind faith. Blind faith, very bad, very bad.
So I think the real key of this message is like trying to remain to have autonomy, right, and control to a certain extent of knowing what's going on in life, because I think it's so widely applicable, not just to football, which you mentioned, or rugby or sports. I think as anyone really trying to climb and develop themselves, to continuously like stay inquisitive and make sure that you have some kind of sense of control and not just be happy with whatever's going on plus feeling that you can ask questions about a situation, certainly if it's personal, to find out what really is happening, because I think that's a way that you can stay ahead of problems and maybe see certain things creep up and say, well, actually, that's not the way that I want it to go, right?
Well, guys, I've got written down here: trust, expertise, transparency, underpinned by responsibility. This is individuals' responsibility. People can't do these things for us without us being involved, right? So we didn't actually intend to talk this much about agents. It's clearly something we feel really passionately about, because I haven't even done a shout out to get subscribing, to get liking, to get on our social media, commenting. Thank you so much for the engagement up to this point. We really, really appreciate it, and hope that the conversations we're having are giving you like some serious insight. I'm feeling it. I'm in the industry, and I'm feeling the insight into the dressing room, into what it's like to be a professional athlete, what it's like to be a leader and a senior pro. Sorry, guys, you are both senior pros.
You heard that there, Maro, right? Maro, you are also old. What? It's not just me, mate.
Wow.
I had a whole section, guys, that was written out specifically about self-care, because I was sat in the sauna this morning, and I know, oh yeah, here you go, fancy sitting in your sauna. But it's really important as part of my own routine that I am able to just get away, because the pressure that I'm carrying, I need some space. And I was at a talk with a leading CEO of a big business in the UK this week, and he was talking about going away and literally cutting the world off for 3-4 days and having thinking time, thinking about how he's developing his company, but also thinking about how he's developing himself as a leader. We don't have a lot of time to get into that right now, but I promise you we will return to this subject. But I will ask Will and Mauro one question each in this area, because I'm fascinated by it and I'm trying to improve in it personally. How do you guys switch off? Do you switch off? Because you're certainly very active on WhatsApp with me. So when do you actually take a step away from the phone and take a step away from being a leader and a step away from being an athlete and just be Will and Mauro respectively?
That might be the best question of today, Leon. To be completely honest, it's probably the thing that I struggle with the most. I'm quite obsessive about certain things. You probably know that from our group chat. Sometimes I might send a message at 3 a.m. in the morning, because that's when the thought comes to my mind. And I always feel like I need to act on something. I really have to take myself away from certain situations. I happen to be in Dubai today, and I have a confession today. I took myself for a manicure and pedicure. As a 32-year-old central defender, that's maybe not something that I should be saying here on our podcast. But I felt like today I'm in between traveling from Saudi to the national team. We have a super stressful and not stressful, pressurized week coming up. World Cup qualifiers, our last 2 games, and what do you do in that moment? So I know that from the moment I land in Johannesburg tomorrow evening, I have to be a team captain. I have to prepare for that game, everything that comes with it. But today was just a day where I had the luxury of giving myself the time to do nothing, so to speak. This was my only appointment today, which I was very happy about, because this for me is a pleasure to be here on the podcast. However, yeah, I think I really have to make sure that I schedule time in for myself, because otherwise days can become very tedious, and sometimes you need to create that space for yourself to be able to head up and be your best version. And I think that's very important, but that is something that I'm still learning and trying to improve in, because I think if you want to do so many things at the same time and people expect so much from you always at the same time, it can be quite difficult. Now I have those days of luxury because I'm not with my wife and my kids, because otherwise this free day would have definitely been on that duty. But that is also a welcome distraction, because then I don't even have a time to check my phone, because I have a 7 and a 4 and a 2-year-old that will be pulling me on by my arm at that point.
So Will's been for a pedicure. I've been in the sauna. Maro, what's happening your end? Have you been for a pedicure?
So
And
today,
be honest with us now. Be honest with
yeah,
us.
no, I can't knock a pedicure at all. I actually, when I go to Nigeria, I normally get a good pedicure. I actually do feel sorry for I feel sorry for them with the way they were scrubbing my feet. They were scrubbing and scrubbing. I think it was the hardest bit of work they had in a long time. So when I go back, I'll see the lady again. I think her name was Wumi, so I'll see Wumi again.
Shout out,
But
Wumi.
Yeah.
but it's probably unsurprising that I'm a little bit similar to Will. And I'll tell you a little story. So at the end of the Lions tour, the last game, about 20 minutes into the final test, I got um had a we wear these gum shields, and the gum shields measure the impact, and I got a hit on the head, and it sent a trigger to the gum shield, which meant that I had to get an assessment for a head injury.
Wow, that's
So
amazing.
so I went off. I failed the test. So I was a little bit shaken. So it was probably it was probably correct, most definitely correct. And then from that point onwards, I had to do my return to play through my concussion protocols. With concussion, everyone has a slightly different response. Some people are fine the next day. Some people takes them a couple weeks. Some people takes them a couple months. Some people, unfortunately, it can end their career. So it's very varied. So I finished the tour. Then the next couple of weeks, I didn't really think anything of it, and I just carried on with my off season, having a good time. So 2 weeks later, I started to try and get back training, but I probably felt a feeling of not quite right in my head, and that probably sustained itself for about 4 or 5 weeks, where feeling not quite right. Probably a little bit longer, maybe like 6 weeks or so. Maybe 6, 7. I'm adding, just doing the maths.
The concussion was still.
So anyway, after speaking to the specialists, after getting brain scans, after doing all the medical things that you would expect of an athlete, what it came down to was they said, look, Mara, you've physically rested, but cognitively, you haven't given yourself any rest. You've been running around, your days are full, your diary's full. Like, you need to rest, you need to clear the schedule. Then I was like, wow. I need to clear the schedule, but I've got this to do on that day. I got this to do then I have to do this. Then it was actually quite hard for me to literally say no to a whole load of things. I cleared my schedule to doing only the essential items for about 2 weeks. Then my head, as if it was magic, started feeling better. So, and what did I do in those times of of rest? I started reading again, which I found incredibly therapeutic. I love a good sauna session. I love a good podcast. I love like active work, which is not necessarily uh, training. I do love training, but in this case, it wasn't probably the best thing to do. So, like going for walks, spending time with family, etc. So, those were the sorts of things I do to take it easy.
I have to testify though, Barrow, this is actually part of you having built an amazing team, because what people don't know on this P&P podcast, we are quite demanding of ourselves. We are still growing in this journey, and part of that was that one of our PR strategists reached out to Maro's strategist and said, can we get some quotes for Maro to part of the promotion? And she was very clear and said, no, he's on cognitive leave. So when I got that feedback, I didn't even know that was a thing or how that worked. So I thought that's actually a very great way of creating some space for yourself. I know you had to probably get a big impact to the head to get that, so I don't want to take away from that. But I mean, there is something so important about the message that you've just given us about creating that space for yourself to process things, download, and be your best version, which you said you needed to obviously read, podcast, taking time out, walking, doing things that give you pleasure and don't raise your cortisol levels and stress. So yeah, I think that is amazing to hear, and you definitely didn't take any exceptions with this podcast. So we are lucky to have you here and back.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. It's my pleasure. Shout out, Nina.
I think that is the perfect story and the perfect summary to end this podcast. So thank you, everyone. It's time to blow the final whistle on this episode, but I hope you found the discussion really helpful. We focused more on the practical advice in this session because we had a little chat in the WhatsApp group, which is constantly buzzing to kind of identify what we wanted to do. And you can be a part of, yes. Sorry, Will, do you want to tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sorry, Leon, I don't want to interrupt, but yeah, we have a WhatsApp group which is part of our community, where we're going to be sharing some hopefully day-to-day updates on things that we are doing, which are helping us on our journey, and that you're part of now because we're sharing it here. And if there's any questions or feedback, we would love to hear that there, because I think it's a great way to get together, get our heads together and learn from you as much as us sharing some of the experience and things that we get to do day to day.
Will, it's never an interruption. It's only a valuable addition. And that was very valuable because I wasn't going to mention it. It's not down in front of me right now in terms of my final thoughts. But look, you can tell, guys, we're really in a good rhythm with this podcast now. We're getting these out weekly for the first series of Power and Purpose. We've deliberately not introduced guests because we thought you'd need a little bit more time to get to know us. And when we get the guests in, you'll be able to feel where our questions are coming from because you've got to know us and got to understand our angles, positionalities, interests, etc. But having said that, watch this space. And vitally, make sure you come back for the next episode. We really appreciate your time and your support. Catch you again soon.